This talk will be about behavioral economics and security. It's not going to be a talk about social engineering, so don't worry about that so much. My background is that I work in knowledge mobilization around cybersecurity, policing, that kind of thing. I'm currently working on with Serene Risk, which is the group running this room today. I have an event coming up called SecRev, which is where different universities around the world all provide online conferences. That's going to be next week. That's why I'm excited about that. There's going to be over 20 hours of presentations on YouTube, live streamed next Tuesday. I'm a Ph.D. student in the Cybercrime Prevention Lab at the University of Montreal. And one of the things that I've done recently is put our CyberSec 101 website, which is free resources for public education on basic cybersecurity, on GitHub. So you can go and find all of those resources there, all evidence-based resources for designing community cyber education. So the plan today will be to sort of go through a high-level model for behavioral economics and cybersecurity. There's no magic. We won't be discussing how to nudge your users into doing good security. We will be providing sort of a foundation on a couple of different theories and models and how we can wedge those things together to make something usable for us as cybersecurity practitioners. As I said, no social engineering, no tricks for breaking into your own company, nothing like that. There's no magic in this presentation. Speaking about magic, though, I'd like to start with this, and this is what I would term Instagram security policy. And this is the kind of thing that I see on LinkedIn. I'm not on Facebook, I'm sure it's there, and it's probably in a lot of other people's presentations. This is a wonderful sentiment, and I get it. Like, I get the idea of pushing security out into everyone's job. I see quite clearly the relationship between this and the move towards endpoint security. The only issue I have with it is it's not true. If it were true, then it would be in your performance examination. Your KPIs would include security. You would be paid based on your efforts to do a security, and it just isn't. The reason I'm particularly upset and made a point of making 2 slides about this is that there are 2 things happening here. One, we're starting to push security out towards our end user, and we're giving them responsibility for security. But at the same time, we're talking about human error. We're saying that they're only human, and these human things, they just happen. So we're also taking responsibility away from them. So we're giving them responsibility, we're taking it back, and in the end, whose responsibility is security? In this scenario, nobody's. So we've put security with nobody currently under this model. And the other thing is other people have jobs to do. Sales people are going to sell things. Receptionists are going to receive. Managers are going to manage. They're all busy doing other things. They're not focused on security. They don't look at the security of a company the same way that the security professionals do. So when I say security, what do I mean? Let's make sure we're on the same page here. It's always good to define terms. So I'm looking at security from an information systems perspective. This information system has 2 major elements. One is technology. The other is a person. Somewhere between that is data getting shuffled back and forth, stored in the computer systems, processed in the computer systems, stored in the human system, processed in the human system. The security of that is maintaining the confidentiality, integrity, and hopefully availability if nobody forgets the information. So that's what I'm talking about with information security. So we have 2 elements, computerized element, the human element, and the data that's being shuffled between them in that relationship. So when we're talking about the human element of cybersecurity, we are talking about this. We're not talking about the human side of cybersecurity. There won't be any emotional quotient discussed today. This is not about doing security in a really human way. I'm not well qualified for that. So let's start talking about security from the human element's perspective. Security basically comes down to decisions. There's no way of backdooring a person. that I'm going to discuss in this presentation. So a rational decision, let's start from that perspective, a rational decision. A rational decision is what we all think we do when we think. Our action is a result of us calculating the benefits against the cost of a particular activity and deciding to take the optimal one. This is the idea of how we take security. This is based on utilitarianism. It's a very old idea. Plato discusses it, Aristotle discusses it. And it became really popular in sort of the mid-1700s. Bernoulli and whatnot discussing what they called expected utility. So this is what a reasonable person would do. Under this model, if you prefer A to B and you prefer B to C, then you will prefer A to C. It makes sense. You're a reasonable, rational person. Slight developments on it. We started predicting and people's different perspectives came into play, but this is the basic idea. So Bentham and John Stuart Mill, mid-1800s, really nailed this idea. The only problem with it is it's completely unrealistic and nobody actually does this in practice. But it looks good on paper, and if you're an economist, it allows you to predict things brilliantly. So then we have an idea which we're going to call bounded rationality, and this was really pushed by Simon in the mid-50s, but it's a much older idea. Voltaire wrote about it. So this is the idea that you don't have total information awareness, as much as the US likes to think they do. You're not able to understand everything in an external context, and internally you're not able to process everything. Voltaire said that the best is the enemy of the good. You're never going to get the optimal solution to every problem, but what you're going to do is get a good enough solution and you will suffice. We will make decisions within the internal and external contextual constraints that we have. We don't know everything, but we'll do what we can with what we know. We're unable to process everything, but we'll do the best with the intelligence that we have. So this is a bounded rationality idea of making decisions. But then we have a kind of a curveball for that. Sometimes we don't make decisions. Sometimes they just kind of happen. This is intuition. This is what happens when you hit a ball, for example. This is what happens when you stop a hockey puck. Now, trying to prepare for this presentation, I started looking into the physics of a hockey puck. To work out where a hockey puck is going to go off of a stick, you have to calculate the angle of deflection of the stick, the angle of the stick when it hits the ice, the air wind speed, the direction of the air, the particular pitch and yaw of the puck. If you can calculate that in the speed that it takes for the puck to get from the end of the stick to the goal, I think perhaps Carey Price should be a Nobel laureate or something like that, because that's incredibly complicated. I don't think we actually rationally work those things out. They're within the bounds of intuition. And they're not just things like that. It's not just stopping a puck. It's driving a car. It's deciding how to fight a fire. It's picking the person that you're going to marry. These things are things that we decide using our intuition. We don't have a rational process for these things. The issue with that is it's not infallible. So we are subject to biases. We do occasionally engage intuitive thinking, and it doesn't really work out. We're susceptible to biases. In this case, it's a visual bias, but we also have cognitive biases as well. These are things such as the what you see is all there is bias. When you're solving a problem, you might not analyze all of the possible information, and maybe not even all of the information that you hold on an issue. It might be a confirmation bias. You might make a decision again because it worked out for you last time. This is to do with framing. The way a problem is presented to you affects how you think about it. If somebody said, there's a 10% chance you'll die in this operation, it sounds very different to there's a 90% success rate. The endowment effect, something that you have is worth more to you than something that you don't have. These are all examples of biases, and there are many of them, but we're not going to get into them too much in this. We're going to stick with this sort of high-level going through a model, because those things aren't going to help us too much for security unless we're going down the social engineering track. So let's put all of those things together, and Tversky and Kahneman did this very well. We have what we call a dual mode system of problem solving. And they call it System 1 and System 2, but just keep in mind that there aren't actual two systems. This isn't the left and the right of the brain, or the front or the back, or two different pieces of it. These are just two different ways of thinking about thinking. So the System 1 is a fast, effortless, automatic response to a problem. And System 2 is a slower, more deliberate, effortful way of solving a problem. So we have a mix of those rational ideas, and we have a mix of that intuition idea. And these things interact as we're solving problems. So is everyone with me so far? It's not so hard? All right, we're going to take a little bit of a break because I'm worried about boring people to death. So we're going to play a game. The way this game works is you're allowed to add, subtract, multiply, divide, all of those numbers at the bottom, and you have to come up with a number at the top. So you ready? Do it in your head, don't do it on a piece of paper, that's cheating. I'll give you 20 seconds to do it. All right, how'd you go? Easy? Not so easy? We went okay? A couple of different responses to that problem. One is intuitively, you knew how to do it. The other one is rationally, you sat there and worked it out. The third one is probably cognitive dissonance, where you just went, bleh. But we're going to try it again, because we've seen how to do it once now. We're going to have another go at it. But first, I'd like you to do something for me. If you don't mind, could you please remember every second word that I now say? Every second word. Still, eyes, creatures, around, rat, when, pencil, scared, unfortunate, queen. Okay, we're going to play the same game again. Very easy. We've done it once before. We've got practice now, so we should be better at it. Off we go. It's just 20 seconds. Okay, now did everyone remember the words? So they were eyes, around, when, scared, queen. How was the experience of that the second time? I noticed when I proposed that we do it again, that people started laughing. That's because we know it's difficult, right? Those are the answers for those who did work it out and feel very proud of themselves. What we did on that second time was we introduced an additional source of cognitive load. So cognitive load theory is based on the idea that you have a limitation on your short-term or working memory. Now, Miller in 1955 put this at about 7 items in your memory. He said the magic number's about 7. It could be more, could be less, depends on what it is and who you are. But a little bit later in educational psychology, they worked through this problem from the basis of cognitive load. And they introduced a couple of different types of cognitive load based on the kind of problems that you're solving. But this idea is something that is an intrinsic motivator for us to start using our intuition. So if you have reached your cognitive load limit, you will start to engage what are called informational schema, which is your long-term memory. So you have a short-term working memory, and then you have a long-term or information schema memory. And if you can't do everything with your short-term memory, you're going to start trying to use the other one, or you might have that cognitive dissonance states where you just stop. So here's cognitive load theory. Long-term memory, cognitive schema. Short-term memory, things that you're able to do in your head. The cognitive schema are created through your experiences and through your understanding of a problem, generally, trial and error things that worked in the past. But if we put those two models together, so we have our dual mode thinking model and we have our cognitive load theory model, and we start putting them together, we have a model wherein cognitive load can induce us to start using those intuition type thinkings. And this has been shown in a number of tests where they show that people under high cognitive load are more likely to be subject to those biases that we're talking about earlier. So if people are taxed mentally while they're trying to perform a task, they might be more likely to try and rely on those heuristics. So let's walk through this. When we're making decisions, we either have an easy response to a problem based on something that we've done previously, or we can work it out rationally. But if we're given too much information, or our internal or external context is overwhelming for us, we might rely on a mixture of both, or something entirely based on long-term memory. So we might solve some parts of a problem using our long-term memory informational schema, and the other part of the problem using our rational thinking process that we have. And then we reach a position where we're happy with the answer that we came up with. We satisfy somewhat. So that's what's going on internally when we're making that decision. Which means that external environment for making a decision can be sort of looked at in a couple of ways. We have a cognitive load element, we have a rational process element, and then we have that intuition, or what we'll call heuristics by this stage. So there are some different elements. So if we're going to make a good decision, optimal environment will require not much cognitive load, something low, something that we can handle easily. The rational process is understood, and we have relevant heuristics. We have information schema relevant to this problem that will enable us to solve the problem and not make too much use of our rational processes. So alternatively, a bad decision might be in a situation where we have high cognitive load, where there isn't a rational process that we're aware of, and we're forced to rely on a heuristic, but we might not have one that's appropriate. So this is a situation where we might engage a bias. We might use flawed processes to solve a problem. And this has been wonderful so far, but we haven't done anything to do with information security for the last bunch of slides. We've had fun, I hope, and we played a game, but nothing to do with security. So what have we learned, and how does that work for us? For security, we should be trying to develop relevant schema, relevant heuristics. How do we do that? Through experience and repetition. Repetition helps us build those schema. Repetition helps us build those heuristics. So by doing things a number of times, we can build heuristics that are relevant. How do we make sure that they're relevant? With appropriate feedback. Repetition with appropriate feedback should help us build those skills that we need. We should recognize situations when we can apply those heuristics that we have. So these are theories that can help explain and guide the success of our security education awareness training efforts. So let's look at a couple of situations. Passwords. Passwords is a great one for me, because we all know how to make a password. We're given 12 different criteria that our password have to meet. We have to keep all of those in mind at the same time, and then we have to generate a unique and random password with the leftover available cognitive resources that we have. Why is that difficult? Well, for the same reason that we laughed at solving the second problem while we were remembering a dozen things. It's not the best way to go about solving that problem. So a better way of presenting the password problem would be to provide an overall idea of what you require, maybe 1 or 2 recommendations to keep in memory, and off people go. Less cognitive load. Some other things to think about passwords while we're on the topic is, who's ever practiced making a password? Without actually making a password, who's ever sat down and practiced it? Where did we learn these skills? Who showed you how to make a password? We were taught by these things that said one word, 1 capital letter, a couple of digits, and then we get surprised that people put in capital P, arse word, 55. Phishing. Now, phishing's a good one because there's lots of interest in phishing at the moment, particularly when phishing testing. And I pulled these off of a Reddit forum from sysadmins. And there's a couple of surprising things about sysadmins. One is they like tricking people. But the other one is that they didn't seem to get the disconnect between providing someone an educational input and then being actually able to do something with it. So if you provide someone with awareness which is information that might be used in a rational process, and then you expect them to have instantly developed heuristics that they'll be able to pull out at the moment that that phishing email comes, there might be a slight disconnect between what you get. But what the second indicates, and there is accompanying research that puts this into context, the repetition of these exercises gives people better tools to deal with them. So over time, the more you do this, the better they get at spotting the phishing emails. The trick is making sure that's relevant to the external threats, but that's a different element. Another thing to talk about is interactivity. Now, this is a better example of how to design, how to make a password. This provides immediate feedback. It's relevant, it's understandable, it's salient, it sticks in your memory. Somebody saying your password is so-so, you might have another chance at doing it. So this is a way that you can implement a password policy that is repeatable, testable, has that feedback. Something else you might implement, and I didn't put it on my slides because I don't like the word, is gamification. Now, gamification is not allowing people in your company to play games. It's using game-type elements to enable them to meet strategic goals that you have in common. Well, hopefully you have in common, but line up with the strategic goals of your organization. What that is essentially is providing good feedback, salient feedback in a way that's easily understandable when they achieve something that is on the way to a strategic goal. That's feedback, that's repetition. Those things help. So in thinking about our security awareness, education, and training, the important thing to remember is that security, education, training, and awareness should contain within it all of those things. It is not awareness. It is not just training. It is all of those things together. By providing awareness of threats so that people are able to rationally process, by providing training so that they have experience and repetition and relevant feedback, and education so they're able to put it within their motivational hierarchy of goals, you're much better off in terms of hoping that they will be motivated and able to meet the requirements of now being in the front line of security. Putting videos on your intranet and expecting people to watch them will not guarantee security abilities. Remember, it's not their job. So with that, I'd like to conclude. Thank you for being a captive audience. I'll just remind you that next Tuesday is SecRev, and if you would like to help me put any of these theories into testable practice, then hit me up. Thank you.